Well, I'm the type of guy who never settles down. Pretty girls are, you know that I'm around. Kiss them and I love them, 'cause to me they're all the same. I hug them and I squeeze them, they don't even know my name. I'm the wanderer, yeah, I'm the wanderer. I roam around and round and round and round. Hello and welcome to Choice Conversations. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. So as some of you may know, a while back I did a parenting podcast with Kevin Geary called Reboot Your Kids. Now, that podcast, we ended up discontinuing it as Kevin just ran out of time. He didn't have the time to keep recording the episodes. They were interview formats, and they ran from like an hour to an hour and a half. And with the work he's putting into his other podcast and the Rebooted Body service that he runs and that he makes his living off of that, he just didn't have the time to have a podcast of that nature. Having said that, he has since started a new parenting podcast that is a much shorter format. He is, because he's so passionate about parenting, this new podcast, the Powerful Parenting Podcast, he is going to answer listener questions, just taking one question per podcast, maybe a 10 or 15 minute podcast where he helps the listeners to work through their issues. So I encourage you to check out the Powerful Parenting Podcast. Really good stuff. In the meantime, I've decided that I am going to put the Reboot Your Kids podcast into the Choice Conversations feed as part of this switching from the Reboot Your Kids podcast to the Powerful Parenting podcast. The old podcasts were taken down on the Reboot Your Kids website, so you cannot get them there any longer. And I thought just for posterity's sake, it would be great to have them available so that they could help other parents going forward. So with that in mind, I'm just going to put them into the Choice Conversations feed over the next few weeks. And if you haven't listened to them, enjoy them. If you have already listened to them in the past, feel free to skip them or give them a second listen. But I just thought I'd give you a heads up on why you're now seeing Reboot Your Kids. All right, well, I hope you enjoy them. Take care.
All right, welcome back to episode 4 now of the Reboot Your Kids podcast, the intersection of real food, authentic parenting, alternative education, and a healthy lifestyle for kids. My name is Kevin Geary from Rebooted Body, and my co-host is Chris Stefanik from the Choice Conversations podcast. How's it going, Chris?
Oh, I'm doing great, Kevin. I'm a little out of breath right now. I just got done doing a resistance training workout. I mean, like literally just got done with it. So
nice.
I don't have a gym membership, so that was here in my home doing handstand push-ups for my shoulders and one-arm push-ups for my chest and pull-ups and pistol squats and just all body weight, you know. So
yeah,
it's intense.
Very cool. I woke up with like brain fog this morning. I don't think I slept very well. My daughter was tossing and turning, and so that didn't go well. But I was sitting here at the computer, like trying to get some work done, and I couldn't think, I couldn't focus. So, I do what I always do. I go into recovery mode. I took a big glass of water. I went on a long walk with the dog, got back, had some more water with some L-glutamine in it. And, now I'm awesome now. I'm awake. I'm ready for action.
I love an early morning walk. That's just such a great way to start the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feels so much better.
And usually I do my walks because I tend to like to get to work right away. I don't know. It's just my style. Like I have my coffee, I get to work right away. And then I do my walk later on in the afternoon, especially in the summer when it's kind of starting to be dusk and it's cooling off and things like that. It's probably my favorite time. But sometimes you're in a little rut. You got to shake yourself out of it. So that's what I did today.
Nice.
So our main topic is education today. And, we have a guest who we're planning on having on that's extremely knowledgeable in this area, specializes in this area, that I'm excited to bring on at a later date. But we are going to tackle this together first and just kind of do like a 101 type thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a big enough topic that I'm sure we could have multiple podcasts on it, no problem. I mean, the gentleman you're referring to, Brett Venat, has an entire podcast of, I think he's up to 200 or 300 episodes now.
Yeah.
I mean, now at this point he's branching out a little bit. They're not every single one is on education anymore, but for the first 100 or so, it was pretty educational intensive. So
yeah. And I guess maybe we should start by parsing that word education, because, if we're talking about what we're really talking about, I guess today is school, which is not necessarily education, right?
Right. Yeah. So, I forget what the tagline is for School Sucks, the podcast that Brett Venat runs. Something like, memorization plus regurgitation plus, indoctrination does not equal education.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what is it about school? I mean, we'll just kind of philosophize for a minute. What is it about school that creates an atmosphere where education isn't necessarily happening? Why aren't they one and the same? Everybody thinks they're one and the same. Why aren't they one and the same?
All right. Yeah. Well, first, I guess we should clarify that what we're talking about when we say school is the public school system in America. I imagine it's not that far from what the U.S. has in at least a few of the other Western countries. And I also know, being somebody who went to private school, I went to Catholic school for 12 years, that a lot of the even private schools, at least in America, have much the same problems as the public schools. They're all kind of, it's this, just a slightly different flavor of the same thing. So that's what we're referring to when we're talking about schools. There are some schools out there that I think are doing a much better job at actually educating students and respecting them and providing a nurturing, healthy environment for the kids. So first of all, just clarifying that. And the thing about the school system, there's all these studies that have been done, and they're showing that, the school system is just getting worse and worse. And, this is measured by education levels. Actually, it's kind of funny. This is how the government does their math. What they do is the actual, as far as how many schools are grading out at an acceptable level, that's staying about the same, but the reason is they keep lowering the standards.
Right.
So, they make that, those field goal posts, they bring them in closer and closer so that we're still hitting about, on 80% of, we're still hitting our target as much as we need to be considered successful, but it's just because they're lowering their standards. So that's the way government handles that problem. But as far as measuring academic success and kids, they have various measures for that. It just keeps dropping and dropping, and kids are getting more and more miserable in school. There's more and more problems socially and the like. And that's because people are evaluating schools by what their rhetoric says. The rhetoric says they're there to educate the students and prepare them for life out in the world, to make the next great generation of American citizens. But what the real goal is conformity and indoctrination. And, it's basically to make worker bees and soldiers so that, the power elites that control, the vast majority of the system, in the United States and around the world, that the power elites they're not sending their kids to these places. I can tell you that. But they want minions, they want pawns to manipulate. And so that's what the masses get. So first of all, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's important to clarify probably that, we're not talking about, some people wearing masks in the shadows, that it's not like this big conspiracy based on, one select group. I think, and Brett kind of explains this well, if I'm explaining it correctly, that we've basically created a system that has opened itself up to outside influence, where people have a lot of power to come in and make changes that benefit them. And so there's a lot of groups vying for this power. And whenever somebody gains influence into the system, they make the changes that benefit them. And the main point is that none of these changes are really looked at, and the system wasn't really designed to benefit the kids who are in it. It's designed to benefit all of the people who have influence over the system. So what you have is you have a bunch of different groups all vying for this power and influence, and that creates the problem that we're seeing today. So it's not like this one masked, hiding in the shadows group that's doing all of this, right? It's just a bunch of different entities that are trying to basically create something that benefits them more than what we have now. And the kids are the ones who are left out, and really the teachers too. I mean, they're being manipulated as well, but that's just the whole point. Is like the system is not set up to do what it proclaims to do. It's set up to do something totally different.
Right. So, and especially if you go back and look at the origins of the public school system in the United States, it's very clear. At least the origins actually truly were a conspiracy. A conspiracy is just when more than one person gets together and has a discussion about how they're going to do something.
Right, absolutely.
But it wasn't a conspiracy with masked individuals like like people think when they say conspiracy that, there's this dark room with a lot of cigarette smoke or cigars and the like. Well, I mean, this is an open conspiracy. You can go back and study the history of it. Horace Mann was involved. There are others involved. What happened is, going back to, the Prussians, and I don't know 200 years ago or something, the generals, the officers in the military came forward and they said, we have this problem when we're out in the field and we're, in a battle and we tell the soldiers to move forward and attack, half of them are just turning and running the other direction. They're not obeying. How can we get more obedient soldiers? And the Prussians sat down and thought about it, and they've developed this public school system that they were going to require everyone to go to. And the purpose of the school system, this was openly stated, was to create good soldiers and good workers for the factories. They were to be people that would take commands, obey without questioning. They would also be comfortable with sitting there all day doing repetitive, mindless tasks. So think like a factory worker, you're just sitting there all day, making widgets all day. Well, so they had the students sit there in a desk all day. If you get up, if you without raising your hand, or if you're making noise, all this stuff, you're punished. And they train the students to be good factory workers and good soldiers. And they had a really fantastic success with this. The population in the Prussian Empire, which then became Nazi Germany and the like, were extremely obedient. And these people, so Horace Mann and these others that were looking into education in the U.S. saw, boy, they're really doing great things over in Prussia. And I mean, they actually traveled over there and talked to the people, the administrators and the people who had put it together, and learned about their system and took it back and pretty much whole cloth copied it, maybe some minor tweaks here and there, but copied it to implement in the United States. And this was 120 years ago or whatever it is. I don't have the exact dates, but it's still pretty much the same today. I mean, there's not a lot of change in the public school system to what it was, 100 years ago. So, I mean, if you want more details on this, Brett's podcast is awesome. John Taylor Gatto is a really great resource on it. He's got a book. It's one of my favorite book titles ever. It's Weapons of Mass Instruction. So that if you prefer, if you're not a book kind of person and you like video or audio, I know you can go to YouTube, and there's a really great interview there with John Taylor Gatto. It's called The Ultimate History Lesson. So if you just go to YouTube and type in John Taylor Gatto, that's going to be one of the top links that comes up, is that Ultimate History Lesson. Give you the specifics of what we're talking about. And you can see it's an open conspiracy. That's not, you can go to your public library and look this stuff up.
Yeah.
And see that this is truly what the quote unquote fathers of public education in the United States, their goal was to make obedient people that they weren't critical thinkers. Because, a critical thinker might say, wait, you're asking me to go over there into the line of fire. I could get hurt from that. Screw that. I'm going the other direction. So no critical thinking. We want conformity. Any kind of individualization gets squashed because individuals might not want to die for the collective. Mm-hmm. But if you conform and the collective is what is the important thing, then you're
Which
more
is
willing
why
to go
why the focus on nationalism as well. If you can get somebody to really align themselves with like the mission of this entity, then obviously they're more likely to do what you ask.
Right. So if you look at what the stated goals are, or I'm sorry, not the stated goals, not the rhetoric, but if you look at what the true goals are of the schooling system in the United States, I would say they're doing a great job at meeting their goals. So you just have to identify what the true goals are. It's just like listening to a politician. There's, the rhetoric that's coming out of his mouth, and then you look at his actions, and they're often nowhere near each other.
Yeah.
So it's the rhetoric is just what is said so that they can get by with doing what they really want to do, which is to appease the people that are lining their pockets.
Yeah, and it's not just military too, and nationalism. And I'm sure you know who Seth Godin is, but he's a very popular business and marketing mind here in the U.S., and he's done a lot of work showing how the public school system really fit that model that you just described, that obedience model, without critical thinking, fit very well into the Industrial Revolution when factories were becoming very prominent, and the factories needed to fill with lots of obedient workers who would just stand on a line and do the same thing over and over and over and over again, right? And not be like, whoa, what am I doing here? I really need to branch out with my life. I really need to do something better. I need to put my art into the world, or look at, what am I really good at? I can do and be so much more than just standing on this line. But public school was kind of drawn towards creating people who would be acceptable or accepting of that position, right? So that they would just stay in the factory and keep pumping out the products. And then the other side of that was, how can we also create consumers of the products that we're actually making? So there's a lot of consumerism involved, that consumerism mindset. I mean, if you go to any public school, it's all about, what shoes people are wearing, what clothes people are wearing, who's the cool kids in town, and so on and so forth. And it's all based on materialism and consumerism, because that's what drives buying the products the factories are making. So it's like you put one generation in the factory, and then the generation that's coming behind it is consuming the products the factory makes. Like, that's a win-win for everybody except the people who are involved in that system, right? Like the kids and so on.
Right. And something that's kind of important to think about here too is, 50 years ago, you could make a good living as a factory worker. You could be working in maybe in the audio industry when that was booming in Detroit, and now it's the Rust Belt. Well, a lot of the industrial jobs have now been outsourced overseas. The labor is much cheaper in other areas. The robotics is really impacting this. I mean, they can even companies now. Some of these car companies they're switching to just fully automated factories. And even with the labor as cheap as it is in countries like China, where they can sometimes pay a worker $40 a day or whatever. These machines are so superior to what a human body can do that they're still coming out ahead by just going with fully automated factories.
Yeah.
So the jobs, I mean, I wouldn't want a factory job, even if I was making like, $60,000 like you used to be able to make. I still wouldn't want that. That wouldn't be fulfilling to me to be sitting there turning myself into a machine. That's what you're doing. If you're working in a factory doing a repetitive task, you are in effect a machine at that point. That wouldn't be fulfilling to me personally, but there were quote unquote good jobs that you could have back in the good jobs that are where you're a machine are disappearing. So the jobs that are out there now, most of the jobs that are out there are ones that require you to use your brain to interact with clients, and they're much more based around information systems and things of that nature. In school, just is woefully, doing a job at preparing you for that kind of work.
Yeah. I would challenge something in there when you said good job, because
I said quote unquote.
Okay. All right. Okay. Because here's the thing. And this is still going on today. If you ask, I think I saw a report that said like 70% of Americans hate their job. Okay. So
right.
if you ask anybody, and I actually had this conversation with somebody the other day because they emailed me saying, what do I do? Because I work 70 hours a week. I don't really have a lot of time to go on walks. It's very hard for me to make time to cook. So it's hard for me to eat healthy. And they wanted me to give them advice. And I started talking about their career. And I was like, well, you're working 70 hours a week. Do you really love your job? And their response was one sentence back. And it was a very short sentence. And it said, it pays well. And I replied and I was like, but do you love it? Do you love what you're doing? And they said again, it pays well. And I said, well, it sounds like I would consider leaving that job and doing something, not just one that fulfills you so that you can be happy. And even if you have to take a pay cut, like I think we talked about in the last podcast, scaling down other areas of life, but like having a good job, when we equate that to it pays well, that is a tragedy. Right? We have a ton of people who are doing work just for money, which this is what the schools set you up for. They set you up for that good job. There's a ton of people in college who say, well, you know, I think I'm going to major in this. And if you say, oh, are you really passionate about that? Well, you know, I guess I can do it. It's, you know, nobody's
Right.
really super passionate about what they're doing. They're just like, well, I heard this has a $80,000 a year income when you get out of college, and I can pay off my student loans that way, and I can have the car and the house that I want. I can be pretty comfortable. And it's like, but what are you doing? Like with your job, you're spending all of this time at a career that you're going to absolutely hate. So we have people making quote unquote good money, but they're desperately unhappy and they're not fulfilled and they're not using their unique skills. They're just doing a job they happen to be able to do or that they were trained to do.
Right, right. The important question to ask whenever somebody says the job pays well is to say, well, what's the money for? Because money is just a means to an end. If you just want money, I mean, it's very clear that people don't just want money for the sake of money, because if you say, okay, you're going to have $2 trillion, but we're going to put you on an island, Robinson Crusoe style, where you have no ability to spend that money. Okay, are you happy now? Is that money bringing you happiness? And at that point, money, all it is good for is kindling. You know, I mean, it's only a means to an end, other than the use as kindling.
Right.
I mean, literally, it's just paper. So then the question becomes, okay, what do you need the money for? So there could be a really good reason you need that money for. I mean, maybe you're being a super saver, like I'd mentioned in the previous podcast, Jake DeSillis, he has these methods of getting to financial freedom. I did a podcast on him on financial freedom, where he gave several different ways you can get there, which basically means you now can do what it is you enjoy because you don't need money. Well, one of the ways to get there is to be a super saver. And it's like, okay, maybe I'm working this job I'm not so crazy about, but it pays really well, and I'm going to be a total minimalist and not spend that money and just save it away. Where, most people save 5%, 10% for retirement or whatever. I mean, I think if you save like 75, 80% of your income, I mean, you can retire in something like 10 years. So you say, okay, I'm going to bite the bullet for 10 years. And then, I plan on living to 100. So, I'm 30 now. I'll retire at 40. That gives me 60 years of financial independence. Okay. That's what it's for. Okay. Then I might say, okay, you're making a killer amount of money. You wouldn't make anywhere near that amount of money if you switched to something else. Maybe. You know what I mean? But you have to sit down and really evaluate what's the money for. And what I found, and you also can't just look at the like, say you're making $100,000 at a job you hate. You say, but I'm getting paid $100,000. You say, okay, well, is there a job you would enjoy that pays you $40,000? Well, then you can't just look at the $100,000 amount. You have to look at that difference of 40 to 60. If I'm happy at $40,000, can I be happy at $40,000? And is it actually going to, am I going to be happier at $40,000 with what I can buy? I mean, clearly you can put a roof over your head and food on the table at $40,000. You can buy an iPhone if that's what you want at $40,000. You can get by at $40,000. So if you're happy at $40,000 and you have all this stuff and you're not happy at 100, then what the hell's the money for?
Yeah. And really because back to, quote unquote education, it would be nice, if they taught kids a little bit of finance, like basic finance, budgeting and money management and stuff. But instead what they teach is just buy, which leads people to, we see this all the time. Income goes up. What else goes up? Expenses go up. Debt goes up. So it's
Yep.
like, it's just a never ending cycle. You know, it's not like we have a bunch of people making $100,000 a year who are living on 40,000. No. You get to 100,000, you're living on 110,000, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you know, you're in debt on top of making all this money. It's craziness.
Right. Here's a little tip for that. What I did, when I've done this several times in my career. So I'm going to be turning 40 this year. So I've been in the workforce for about 20 years now. There's been times when, you know, my current job was paying the bills, right? I would get a raise. You know, I was already happy with what my income was before the raise, right? So I would just say, you know what? I am going to automatically have that money drawn out of my account and go into savings or go into my retirement plan or whatever like that. And so that way it was being saved up. And then, you know, that allowed me to do things like, comes time to buy a car, I just buy it with cash because I've got savings built up or whatever. I mean, I haven't paid a loan I gotten a loan for a car in, you know, the last several cars, things like that, you know, and that saves a lot of money and interest and the like. And of course, my retirement, I'm contributing a lot to that because on numerous times when I've gotten a raise, I've just said, you know what, I was totally happy before I got this raise, so I'm just gonna put that in retirement. So, I mean, those are the kind of little things you can do to combat that, because when you see this money, you know, oh, there's more money in my bank account, it's really hard to fight that, to not just spend it. Oh, well, okay, well, that means I can buy more stuff, but you were happy before you bought that stuff. You know,
Yeah.
so why you spending it, you know? So.
Yeah, it's definitely putting things in perspective and being content. Contentment is a huge part of all of this, because if you're not content, then you're always chasing that next dollar so you can spend that next dollar, right? It's really, I think contentment is the heart of being able to save and being able to invest. That if people feel out of control with money, like they can never get a handle on it, they can never follow the budget, they can never invest. It's a deficiency of contentment. I think they really need to look at that part. The other thing is, I want to be very careful that we don't fall into the trap of, there's a toxic belief, and this is kind of taught in public schools as well and in universities, is that the passion that you have for something won't lead you to the same income as if you took a quote unquote, again, good job. So we can train you for a job that makes $80,000 a year. If you follow your passions, you'll probably be in the poorhouse. You probably won't be you'll be struggling, you know, you'll be a starving artist. When the reality is that you can find or follow your passion and create a company and a business and be an entrepreneur and far exceed that ceiling that they pretended you were going to bump your head into.
Right. Yeah, and there's a lot of mythology about that out there, and, you know, 9 out of 10 businesses fail and all of these things. And the truth is that right now it's never been easier to be an entrepreneur, to work for yourself, than it has been in the past. I mean, what the internet has enabled people to do, to create their own businesses online, is amazing. So if you don't need a lot of stuff as well, you know, if you're not hooked on keeping up with the Joneses and having this, you know, this fancy car, you know, pretty quickly you can get by on an income from an internet business or something like that. And then you can work, if you're passionate about it, you're going to put a lot of time and energy into it. You know, you're going to go beyond just the bare minimum. And so then it's going to have a much higher chance of being successful. You know, where if you hate a job, then you're only going to do the bare minimum. Yeah. And your odds of being successful and really advancing there is not going to be great. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with having a job if you love your job. I work a job.
Yeah. I
have an employer, but I love my job. You know, so I'm actually, you know, passionate about it. I'm sitting there, you know, thinking I'll be at night, and an idea will come up and I'll jot it down, you know, oh, I got to do that, you know, and it's not like I'm just like, you know, the bell rings at, you know, at 5:00 and I punch my card and I go, drink myself in a stupor so I don't have any thoughts about work. I mean, that's like, I don't know. I'm still thinking about it, not thinking about it in a bad way, like it's driving me crazy, but like, oh man, I just had a great idea how to solve that problem. My client's going to love this kind of thing. And it's because, I found something that I like. So, but there's a lot of ways, to make money and have a living following your passions. And I had Jim Rogers on my show podcast, Choice Conversations, and he talked a lot about this. It's kind of the same thing, following what you're passionate about. He said, quote unquote, invest in what you're passionate about. So he said, I'm passionate about the financial markets, so I've become an investor, a professional investor. I had the largest hedge fund in the world at the time, and I've retired from that, and now just invest my own money. But that's because I'm passionate about the markets. If you're passionate about gardening, go into gardening. You'll be able to start your own store. I mean, maybe you start working for somebody that has a garden store to learn some of the ins and outs of the business world and the like. But have your eye on that. You'll know better than others what's working because you're passionate about that industry, and you'll be able to see where there's deficiencies. Oh, you know what? There's a niche here for me. There's a niche online. When I go to Home Depot, their gardening section is lacking this, this, and this. You'll know that because you're passionate about it. So I can make a niche, and maybe there's not a huge amount of consumers for this out there. That's why Home Depot doesn't have this at the stores, because there's not a huge number of people in this area. But when we include the entire planet, which the internet reaches, a few here, a few there adds up pretty quickly. You don't need that many clients before you've got a large enough base that you've got a successful business. So you find a niche. And I mean, you can now, they say, oh, you can't compete with Walmart. You can't compete. There's these large box stores that you can't compete with them anymore. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think you can. Maybe you can't opening up a storefront, a brick and mortar storefront.
Well, you can't compete with them doing the same thing they do. You can't open, Walmart and call it your last name and try to outcompete them, right? That's not going to happen. It's the competition happens with the innovation. The competition happens with doing things differently than what the big players are doing. Like you just talked about opening a store. There's so many angles you can really attack here in garden. There was a guy on Shark Tank who was I don't know exactly what he was doing, but we'll just say it's under the gardening umbrella. But he came up with a new way to irrigate plants in fields and started a completely new company based on this new process of irrigation. And boom, so it's not always like, oh, we have to get into gardening and do what everybody else is doing in the gardening field. You can go in and completely turn an industry or a field upside down, create a new product, create disruptions in the marketplace. So but here's the problem. That's autonomy, right? And we have a bunch of people, well over 90%, going through public schools where autonomy is the opposite of what they want, which is why entrepreneur is a dirty word in public schools. And there are no lesson plans on becoming an entrepreneur in public school that I know of. When I went through, it was non-existent. So when you said that 9 out of 10 businesses failed in the first 5 years, I wonder why. The people who are autonomous and wanting to disrupt the marketplace and wanting to go in and innovate and create new things don't have the skills to do that. They're all trying to figure it out as they go along, and there's a very high failure rate there because we have an education system that's hell-bent on getting our cattle going down one narrow path, and that's it, right? So that's a huge issue here.
Right. So, in summary, public schools are creating worker bees for companies that will go into a job where 70% of the people are miserable. So public schools are setting your children up to be miserable. Is that really what you want for your child? The odds are a 70% chance they're going to hate their life for 40, 50, 60, 80 hours a week. And when you subtract out sleeping, that's a pretty large percentage of your waking hours there. Mm-hmm. But basically the majority of their life, they're miserable.
Well, the rest
that's what they're shooting for here.
The hours outside work, by the way, are spent complaining about the hours they spend inside work.
Right. Yeah. Or having other toxic methods to cope with the misery. So, like I said, hitting that happy hour, because you're in so much pain, you've got to have something to deaden it. Maybe this is, that's where you're going and eating a box of Twinkies, etc. So, yeah, public schools are setting your children up to be miserable. And I would add on top of that, the people that surround your children have a huge, huge influence on them. The people that surround yourself have a huge influence on you. So I know when I had you on Choice Conversations, Kevin, we talked about this, that, some of the most important decisions you can make in your life, probably, it's up there at the top, is just who am I going to choose to allow in my circle?
Mm-hmm.
Because they will influence you whether you want them to or not. People that are around you they inevitably are going to influence you. It's the way human psychology works. You start to internalize the personalities of those around you. So when you go to a public school system, it's just loaded with people that are toxic to your children. There are the other kids who are raised in these homes where, they're not doing the things we're talking about, Kevin. They're not raising them peacefully. They're spanking them. It's beating. Spanking is a nice word for beating your kids. They're yelling at them and the like. So they're going to pick up on that. There's going to be a lot of aggression that these other kids are going to have that they learn from their parents. Your children going there are going to pick up on that. They're going to be, instead of, being bullied at home, they're going to get bullied at school or whatever. The teachers are going to be bullying them. These teachers are toxic personalities. Most of them hate their jobs and are miserable and are in there and view the children as adversaries.
Well, they have no autonomy either, right? So they're stuck. They feel stuck in the same system. A lot of them, mean well, but as we know, intention really has nothing to do with anything. You can be well-intentioned and still completely screw people over. So that's an important thing to mention, I guess, too.
Right. And let's face it, a lot of the teachers do view the children as their adversaries. You can hear this. I personally haven't had this as secondhand, I'm sorry, but I remember talking to a gentleman who had overheard a conversation of teachers as they were out, I think it was on a spring break or something, and they were at a restaurant at a table next to him, and they were talking about how glad they were to be away from those little devils and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, my God, if my kids went to that school, what would I be thinking right now? I'm having some pretty rough thoughts right now, and my kids don't even go to that school. So, these people, they are toxic to your children. Your children will absorb that. They're being raised. It's not just you that's raising your children. It's everyone in their environment is having an impact on their upbringing, and it's toxic to them. So it's like if there was a radiation leak at the mall, and authorities were cautioning people to avoid it, even though maybe there wasn't an immediate threat of death. It wasn't going to be immediately lethal. Would you go ahead and go in the mall? Would you send your kids in the mall? Well, that's what you're doing when you send your kids to public school. So there are things that are detrimental to them there. The psychological health, their emotional health, and their physical health. Being around that as, because the mind and body are tied together, and we know how much stress impacts their physical health.
Yeah, there's a line that I get all the time when I talk to people about alternative schooling and public schools, and they say, well, the schools are great in my area. I've moved to this specific area, and I've checked out everything, and they give the kids more autonomy, and it's not like, some inner city public school, where, of course, those public schools, right? Those public schools have problems, but I handpicked this public school system for my kids. It's so much better. And it's like, they're always talking about the education component. It's a blue ribbon school and this and that. Look, I went to a blue ribbon public school. I went to a middle school that was right behind it. Both of them had rampant drug problems. Middle school, drug dealers in middle school, rampant. The middle school I went to at one day, out of the year, had 5 fights in one day.
Right.
This is in a community where the average income is probably over $80,000 a year. This is not inner city. This was the rich suburbs, okay? Nice schools with lots of money. Also had lots of bullying, lots of fighting, lots of drugs, lots of everything that you don't want your kids to be anywhere near. And I can't help but think, I mean, when people say, well, it's this school says, it doesn't even matter. The education component doesn't even matter at that point, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't Let's say they were experts at educating kids. It doesn't matter. It's a cesspool of violence and lying and all of this other nonsense that kids are being subjected to. It's not worth the education at that point.
Yeah. It's interesting. In my neighborhood, the school that my daughter would go to if we send her to public school is one of the best schools in the state of North Carolina. You know, it's ranked very highly on all these standardized tests and things of that nature. And I talked to the parents of kids that go there, and they're like, oh yeah, it's a great school. We love it. And so tell me about it. What's going on, you know? And well, you know, they start having intercourse at 3rd grade. So, you know, that's kind of disturbing. And I'm like, yeah, I can see what you say. It is a great school, isn't it? And I'm like, oh my God, you know, my daughter's Montessori school goes through 6th grade. And I mean, there's kids aren't even like holding hands. There's like no dating yet or anything like that, you know, going on. And there's like absolutely no bullying. And there's no fights. I mean, like zero fights. Mm-hmm. Zero fights at her Montessori school. I mean, they're taught to resolve conflicts peacefully. And of course, the teachers model that. But when the teachers deal with the students, they're peaceful. They don't use aggression. So all around them, there's peace. When there's some kind of conflict, you sit down and negotiate and solve the problem together. It's a problem to be solved. It's not a battle to be won.
Right.
So, yeah, it's interesting. I see that as well, and it's funny watching my daughter with children that go to that school, and she has like pretty much no interest in them. You know, occasionally there'll be an opportunity where she'll sit and play with them, and you know, gets along just fine or whatever. But in general, it's almost like they're like another species. Like they'll come up to her and be like, oh, you want to play and do this or whatever. And she'll be nice to them, but she would much rather, like if we're at the park, let's say, she would much rather play with me and my wife than the kids that are at the public school. Cause it's like it's foreign to her.
Yeah.
These people, and I could see watching them, the kids at the public school are very cliquey, you know, and they're just really cliquey and really into conformity. And oh my God, did you see what she was wearing? I can't believe that. Or, you know, and really into what other people are wearing, where it's like at my daughter's school, you know, it's not about conformity at all. They're all individuals. Mm-hmm. And you go there and you're like, there is no dress code. I mean, you go in there, kids might be wearing anything. You go around the room, just vastly different styles. Some like totally outlandish to like coming in dressed up to whatever. I mean, it's just whatever the kids want to wear, they come in that way. And nobody cares. Nobody's like, oh, that's kind of an interesting outfit. You know, there's none of this peer pressure to be like the rest of the group. And the individuals that come out of it are just so beautiful. You know, instead of being this fake thing that I couldn't wear that shirt because I'll get laughed at for that. You know?
Well, right. Okay. So here's the underlying theory of mine, is that these cliques happen in public school because it's a violent environment. And we all know the phrase strength in numbers, right? You would desperately not want to be an individual in a violent environment because there is no strength, right? The individual is the weakest person. If you have a gang of 5 and then you have an outsider, the outsider's screwed, right? So they form all of these cliques and they gang up on other people or other cliques, and they kind of separate and self-segregate themselves because that's the only way to feel safe, is like, I have to find some people and I'll behave like them in order to stay accepted in this clique, because that's the safest way to exist in this system.
Right, right. And you see this modeled beautifully, and it really, really speaks to the point you're making in the prison system. So there are individuals in the prison system get killed or whatever, or they get abused. Their lunch gets taken every day or whatever, you know. Everybody joins a gang when they go in. You're part of the Crips, the Bloods, the whatever, the Irish gang, the Italian gang, whatever. You pretty much have to join a gang for survival. And that's pretty much what you're doing when you send your kids to school, is you're sending them to prison. In fact, the parallels between school and prison are very numerous. I mean, they even look like prisons. Let's look at these things. So,
yeah,
you got the fence up around outside and this big brick building with these small windows and
cold hallways with the surveillance cameras and yeah. So.
And
the hall pass, man, you gotta have a hall pass. That's another thing that we haven't really touched on yet, is all of the rules and just everything about public school system from the minute you walk in to the minute you leave is about obedience and being scheduled and being told what to do. And, we could get into the bells ringing, so if you're going to educate a child, is the best method to put them in a subject for 45 minutes, ring a bell, switch them to another subject for 45 minutes, ring a bell, switch them, that part doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make sense from the very foundation, the core of how they try to accomplish this doesn't make sense if they're really interested in education. If they're interested in something else, all of that makes complete sense, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's, the whole methodology is terrible. I mean, I could go into the specifics of where the Montessori method is superior, the advantages there, but there are a lot of options. So, I'm not saying the Montessori method is one for everyone. I'm saying find an environment that fits your child. That's kind of the point here, is that some methods of education work for some kids, some others, work for others. But this public school system, it's a one size fits all. And I don't even know, I don't know that there's anybody out there who would do better off in the public school system than some, it's just such a toxic environment. Like you said, even if they're masters at educating your kids, the other messages that are being sent to your child about conforming and following these rules and not having freedom, you're not trusted to make good decisions, so we're going to make every decision for you all day long. Those kind of messages, what that does to a child's self-confidence and things like that, ability to think that they can run their own life. I just would not do it. So
yeah, even the blind obedience to authority, if you play that out when people are adults, how very destructive that idea is. That, you could take any of these, if you were creating a list of the pros and cons of public school, and you legitimately went down and listed a whole bunch of pros, and then you went and listed the cons, and were like, okay, well, which one of these cons is the tipping point? And it's all of them. Every con on the list would be well, that one single thing right there should disclude everything. Everything should be irrelevant because of this one con right here. And you could do that multiple times, right?
Right. So we could probably pick each con and do a podcast on that, go into the details of all the psychological damage and how you're crushing intrinsic motivation and creativity and creating a hatred for education rather than a love of learning, that I think most kids are natural born learners. They love learning, those kind of things. We could sit here and do a podcast on each one of those. But
which we probably should, because it's so hard to do. At this point, it's so hard to do an overarching podcast when there's a gazillion tangents you want to go on, and we have to keep this thing under an hour. So
right. So let's talk about what you can do. If your child's in public school right now, or it's getting to that point where you're thinking about putting him there, let's look at some of those options can be what are your other options out there? I'm telling you, your alternatives. You're like, what are you talking about? There's a Catholic school in my neighborhood and a public school, and we're not Catholic, so.
And we pay for the public school, so we might as well go there.
Right. So what are you telling me? There's options. So, the first thing I would say is, if you can stay home with your kids, I think that's a really great option. There's homeschooling. There's all kinds of flavors of homeschooling where you're working with your children. We should look to have guests on our show. I don't have the name in front of us right now, but I was reading an article about this family who I think they had 8 kids, and it's something like, and forgive me if the numbers aren't exactly right here, but I think it was something like 6 of their kids they're homeschooled them all now. 6 of the kids were in college by age 11. And like 4 of them were like, or something like that. I mean, I think there was like 2 of them were in college by age 9 or something like that, were actually able to pass the entrance exams and get into college. And they asked her, well, how do you do it? And like, boy, you must have some rigid outline and it's like boot camp every day. She said, no, when we get up, we have no idea what we're going to work on that day. The one thing we know going into that day is we know whatever it is we do, we're going to have fun. We just make sure that we're having fun and when we're enjoying it. And if we're not, then we do something else. We find, okay, well, what would be fun to do now? And she gave a lot of examples in the article and the like, and maybe we can link to that in the show notes. But it's just that kind of, it's going back to what we were talking about with passion. If you do what you're passionate about, you can be far more successful than if you're doing what you hate. So
yeah,
that's kind of the key, is finding what you're passionate about. So homeschooling enables you to sit there and discover with your child what their passions are and feed that fire and really nurture them.
One-on-one, which you can't do in any sort of mass group setting, right? That just can't happen. A public school cannot accomplish anything remotely similar to that.
Right. And so, I mean, there are different ways. There's homeschooling where the parents are more involved. There's, of course, unschooling, which it's the parents are less involved. It's more driven by the child. So in unschooling, you're saying, I trust my child to make good decisions. I trust my child's natural desire to learn, that they're going to want to learn things like reading. I had on Choice Conversations, I interviewed Lainey Liberty and her son Miro, and she pulled him out of school in like 8th grade or whatever. And I think he's, I don't know, maybe 16 now. And they just travel the world together. That's their job. If you quote unquote job, talk about somebody who's learned how to live on a small amount of money. I think she gave up a job where she was making 6 figures in California, Southern California, where now she says she gets by on like $1,000 a month and just selling a few things on the internet and asking for donations for her podcast and things like that. And her and her son just travel all over. And she's like, the world is our classroom. And he's doing all these amazing things, learned all these things that we're interested in. Another one that I've had on my show, Dana Martin, is very famous in the unschooling movement. And, she talks about how, there's all these things that it's very important for a child to learn reading, and they're start learning at 5th grade, at 5 years old, and they have to be hitting these milestones. If they don't meet it by this certain age, then that window of opportunity is gone, and so you have to force them to learn. And she said, with my son, he wasn't interested in reading until he was, I don't know, maybe, and again, forgive me, I don't know the exact date here, but it was like 8 or 9. It was much, much older than what most kids start reading. I mean, if you're in public schools, for sure, they're going to force you to start reading earlier than this. And she said, you know what, he skipped. He picked it up and he was driven. He's like, all of a sudden, just one day said, I want to learn. And she said, in like no time at all, he was reading Harry Potter. She said, basically, his first book was Harry Potter, which that's basically an adult level of book. I mean, adults read them. I've read the series. Many adults love them. Some of those books are like 900 pages, I think, maybe, with the longest one.
Something like that.
It's a serious piece of work. He started with that. She's like, he skipped all that Dick and Jane, See Dick Run, stuff, and went right for the good stuff just because he was, she said it's a myth that you need to have it by this date, that they need to learn this stuff or they've missed the opportunity forever. So there are schools that are unschooling schools. So the famous one in Massachusetts, there's a Sudbury. They call that whole class of school is called Sudbury schools, where you just go there and the kids can do whatever they want. It's a way if the parents are working and they don't want to leave their child at home, or maybe legally in their area you're not allowed to leave your child unattended at a certain age. So they enroll them at a Sudbury school where the kids can just go there and do what they want, and there are adults around to just be there as guides, as resources for the kids. But the kids can do whatever they want. They want to play guitar all day, they can do that. If they want to go out and play basketball all day, play cards, read books, you name it. And they said what happens in these Sudbury schools is, kids they at some point they're playing a game and they're like, man, I can't really play this game without learning math. And so then they learn math. I can't really do that. I really want to read. I see other kids reading, so I want to read. You get to like high school age and the kids start thinking, well, what is it that I want to do? And they're like, well, you know what? I'd like to be a doctor. Well, okay, that means I need to go on to college. Okay, so what do I need to get into college? All right, that means I have to pass this test. All right, so to pass this test, I need to know this. And there's been examples of kids that at 16 years old had pretty much no interest in math, could do just basic addition and subtraction or whatever. At 16 said, you know what, I want to be a doctor. That means I got to pass this test. And in like 10 months of self-directed, self-driven desire to learn math, completely caught up on, and had finished 16 years of school, were able then to like go in and pass the SAT math part because it was then intrinsically motivated. It wasn't this external force forcing them to do it. And so it's like when you want to do something and you're driven to learn it, you can pick it up then.
Yeah, and that's a key thing to hit on because, again, going back to toxic beliefs, there's two toxic beliefs here. One is that if kids aren't in this box, they won't learn. And the truth is that life is learning, like you said. The kids are going to come across a point where it's very helpful for them to have math. Therefore, they're going to learn math if they want to do that thing that they're interested in. Same with reading, same with whatever. We talked about how you were on a walk picking blackberries and what road that can lead down of discovery and learning about nutrition and things like that. It's based on what the kid is interested in. Now, there's a second toxic belief that adults have that, again, education only happens inside a box. So you have a lot of adults running around who not very happy with where they're at in life and they want to do something different. They're like, I got to go back to school. Right. And it's like, what are you going to get in school that you can? We have Google, like we have the internet now. We have
right.
Information is free. There's no reason to pay for information unless you're paying another human being who's doing what you want to do to show you how to do it. That's a legitimate, like, I'm going to pay for this knowledge and skill or whatever. To pay a teacher who's not even doing what you want to do to teach you out of a textbook. And by the way, going back to what Seth Godin said, if you want somebody to hate learning with a passion, give them a textbook on the topic, right? And we have this idea that if textbooks didn't exist, we'd have a bunch of people running around, vomiting on themselves, alcoholics, doing nothing productive with their life. Like, that's the vision that we have. If kids don't go into school and open these textbooks and we don't teach them, they're going to turn into these rampant, useless drug addicts running around. We'll have this society of knuckle draggers. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, none of that makes any sense whatsoever. It's boiling down the human race to look at people as human beings who want nothing out of their life. Is that really our assumption? Shouldn't our assumption be that human beings are exploratory? Like they want to go explore the world and the benefits and advantages that lay ahead of them and learn what they need to learn in order to get those benefits and take advantage of opportunities. That's what humanity is. That's a basic survival instinct and a thrival instinct, right? So that's such a toxic belief that these boxes that we've set up are the only place that education happens. It's just mind-blowing to me.
Right. Yeah, and John Taylor Gatto goes into a lot of the the details on this, but basically we've not been operating in this manner for the vast majority of human history. I mean, we're talking like 100, 200 years of having this in place. But the majority of human history, this is not how children were raised. This is not how children were educated. And you look at some of the amazing people in our history that have just done phenomenal things. And so many of them, they were not educated in this way. They were not, it's, like the founding fathers in the United States were like largely like school dropouts. Ben Franklin, I'm trying to think what level of school Ben Franklin went to, and meanwhile, this guy was just a Renaissance man, was successful in so many different areas. He was like, a master diplomat, an inventor, had multiple businesses and all this stuff. I think it was Thomas Jefferson. His parents, they left him a plantation. He inherited a plantation at, I think, and again, forgive me if I don't have the year exactly right, but I'm thinking it was like 7 years old. His age was a single digit. I know that. Mm-hmm. And he had 250 employees reporting to him at 7 years old, and he ran this plantation. And, that's a big business, and was fully capable of doing it. We've put children not only in a box for education, this is the only way they're going to learn, but we've also said children aren't capable, like you said, we don't trust children to be able to make good decisions. We don't trust that children can actually do all these things like start their own businesses. And I mentioned Jim Rogers earlier. Jim Rogers had a business going when I think he was 6 or 7 years old, was making, several dollars a week. And now this guy's got some gray hairs on his head. So when I say he was making like $5 a week, this was back at a time when that was big money, especially for for somebody that was 6 years old. So it's not like $5 today.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can have your own business very young, and
I would actually say you should have your own business very young, because you know what, if we go back to look at the failure rate and the risk involved in starting a business, and we all know the stats and the numbers, we're hit over the head with them basically. If you have an entrepreneurial bone in your body and you are a child, and we'll just say it could be age 12, it could be age 14, that would be prime time. But even going into 18, there's a lot of people get to 18 and they're trying to make that decision. Should I go to college or should I start a business? I'm really passionate about this and I really want to start a business, but my parents are saying I should go to college. And my high school teachers are saying I should go to college. And society is telling me I should go to college. Starting a business is too risky. And if I start a business now, I'll never come back to college. Like it very rarely happens that somebody makes it back to college. This is my chance. I could even go to a college in a faraway place and explore the world, and so on and so all of these fairy tales that are told, right? When the reality is you don't want to spend those years where you have no responsibility, no family to take care of, no debt yet, no nothing. That's the time to start a business and fail if you're going to fail, and then start another one, and so on. Don't go to college, get in relationships, get $80,000 in debt, get a wife, get a kid, and then start a business and lose everything. Like that's the worst plan that you could possibly follow. But that's the plan we set people up for, because no, you got to go to college. You're 18. You need to get in that system. You don't miss out, right? And it's like it sets people up for gargantuan failure later on when they decide that they didn't like this job thing and they want to go start a business. Man, that business should have been started at age 18 when you didn't have anything to lose. That's when that should have been started. Right.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to do a podcast on money and with parenting. And I can give you some of the stories that of my daughter. She's had multiple businesses at this point, some successful and some not so successful, but it's been a great learning experience for her. And, she wasn't out on the street when that, that business failed,
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, man. If your child is interested in doing anything entrepreneurial, that's perfect, because that will teach them everything they need to know to be economically useful. You have to know math. You have to know some science. You have to know how to relate to other people and talk to other people. You have to gain confidence to go out and sell. You've got to do so many things that you don't do in public school. They don't even touch on it. It's not even close. So I think that's one of the best routes people can take is how do I have my child start something where they can go acquire other people's property voluntarily, right? Like the amount of thinking that has to go into going to acquire other people's property voluntarily teaches you everything you need to know about life, I think.
Right. Yeah. So, we've talked about if you can stay home with your child. And I think, we've mentioned at least in other podcasts, if not a lot in this one, that the ways to get there is basically cutting down on your expenses. Do you really need two incomes? We talked a lot about that in previous podcasts. So, let's say you're exploring your options and, okay, we really don't want to go down to one income. We don't want to stay home. You said there's a Sudbury school somewhere, but there's not one here. Well, you might want to consider moving. Or you've heard, Chris, you talk about Montessori schools and how great they are. You've got a podcast on Choice Conversations specifically on just Montessori schools. That sounds awesome, but there's not one here. Again, what's important to you? Is your child important to you? Do you walk around saying, my child is the most important thing in my life? Well, if you say that, is that true? Or are you just blowing smoke up my ass?
Yeah.
Because if it's true, then you might want to consider, well, we need to move then to where there's a better school. I don't want to put my child in this toxic environment. I want to put them in an environment where they're going to flourish. One way to do that would be one of us stays home and we do homeschooling or unschooling. Another way would be to move to where there's an unschooling place or a Montessori school that we really love or whatever. There's a lot of options out there beyond just unschooling and Montessori. I'm not meaning to just say those are your only two. There are more. Find something that your child is happy with and loves learning, and that's the kind of the key there. But anyway, explore moving. Let's look and you can also move to a place. Another thing about moving is you can move to a place that's more affordable that would allow you to go down to just one more income. If you're living in New York City and it's like, well, we're already living in an apartment, Chris, and it takes two incomes for that. What are you wanting me to do? I can't. If I downsize, I have to move where I'm a 3-hour commute to find a cheaper place to live, 6 hours in the car. I'm not exactly going to be a good parent doing that, am I? It might be time to consider switching jobs and see if you can find a job in Iowa where you can have a house for much less. So, it's like, what are your priorities, really?
And let's not forget that, we signed up for this, okay? Like, at some point we have to realize that we're not just doing what we want to do anymore. Like when you choose to bring a child into the world and you commit to taking care of them and doing the best for them, these are the hard decisions that you've got to make. This isn't anything to take lightly. This isn't anything to say, well, I'm stuck. This is the decisions I've made and we're just going to have to do our best and stick with this and so on and so forth. Like you've got to keep pressing forward. You've got to keep taking action to make sure that you're not putting your child in a situation that isn't going to produce the best outcome for them or at least an outcome that's obviously destructive. And that's what we're trying to say here with this talk about education is that the school system, going back to even if it was expertly done on the education front, as far as psychological health, it's a disaster. And it's not acceptable. So doing whatever we need to do, like you said, moving, right? Exploring other alternatives to education, whether that be homeschool or unschool or anything else. Anything that you can do, and even one step forward is a good step. And just keep going down that rabbit hole and continue to explore and continue to make the change. But you have to first be willing to take responsibility, and you have to be willing to make hard decisions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's very well said. And I know we're running up on an hour here. One thing I did want to get in before we close this up, if you do make that decision and you move to a place where you can find a great school, and you're going the schooling route as opposed to the homeschooling or unschooling route, if you're going to put your child in school, you must be active in that school. Be as active as possible. Volunteer at every possible opportunity. If they don't advertise volunteer opportunities, go in and ask. Be like, I'd like to come in and just be an assistant in the classroom. I want to come in and just observe, or is there this activity I can do, or maybe I can come in and lead an activity. So an example of that is I play guitar. Multiple times every year at my daughter's school, I'll go in and do a music lesson and play guitar for them. They have a field trip where it's like a camping field trip. Mm-hmm. So you have a big campfire at night and all that. I go to the campfire. I'm the campfire guitar guy, and I lead the school in sing-alongs. So things like that. My wife is a scientist. She's gone in and given science lessons at school. These sort of things. Go in and see what your options are to be active in that school. And then you want to establish a relationship with the teachers. This is, for one thing, it's going to alert you right away if maybe this isn't a school for your kids. If there's any red flags, the closer the relationship you have with that teacher, the more apparent they're going to be. But it's going to build a connection with them to where you have more influence over them. You can then work with them to make sure your child's needs are being met as best as possible. The more that you have this connection with them, the more you have a relationship, the more the teacher is going to be willing to work with you, the more you're going to learn about your child and be able to help out at home to help, maybe reinforce some of these lessons at home, or, so that's a really important thing.
Yeah.
And also, being active at the school, you get to know, you learn the other students. So before, I was saying that sometimes students can be toxic. The more you're at the school, the more you'll learn about the other students, and you'll be able to get a feel for, okay, maybe that child is not somebody I want to be around my offspring so much.
Yeah.
So you can then, offer guidance, maybe when there's play dates or things of that nature, steer them towards the ones that are really healthy, the ones that are really going to be a positive influence in your child's life, and away from the ones that would be a less positive influence. You do things like that. And also, while we're on that topic, please meet the families of your children's friends, especially before you're going to send them over to their house unsupervised or anything like that. I remember when I was a kid, I don't know that my parents, some of my friends' parents, I don't know that they ever met my parents.
Yeah.
My parents would pull into the driveway. I'd get out and walk in, and I'd say, "Bye, Mom." I go up to the house,
It's scary.
And I think about that. And, if meet their families, get to know them, make sure that this is somebody you trust to have around. It's again, we don't want to have toxic people in your child's life. You're sending the message to your child that this person that's messed up, that's abusive, that's mean, that's whatever, it's totally okay to have people like that around.
Right.
That's the message you're sending if you have these people in your life. But you're not going to know that unless you get in there and meet the people and do the work. Set up, have them over for dinner. Have them over, say, come on over for a barbecue and we can hang out, and and tell them, be sure to emphasize, oh yeah, bring all your kids, because you want to know about those siblings of your children's friends as well.
Yep.
Especially the older siblings. You need to watch out for that. And if there's a red flag, don't let your child go over there alone.
Yeah. And
that's just how it is. We, as parents, I'm very much into allowing my daughter to make her own decisions, but we are responsible for the safety of our children,
Right.
And so there are some areas where, if your child's going to run out in the street, you grab them. You don't just let them do that. Well, you know what I mean? So at some point we are there to provide a safe environment for our children. And if somebody there, you don't trust the family of one of your children's friends, then, they can't go over there alone. Maybe there are other things you can do. If they really want to have this friendship, you can invite them over to your house all the time. They can do stuff where you just go as a family, like you're there, but it's not overnight at the other person's house.
Yeah. This brings up an idea in my mind where a lot of parents complain, especially in the teenage years, where it's like, oh man, I'm really, not excited that my child chose that person as their best friend in high school. And it's like, because you see all these red flags, and then you're like, well, how did this happen? This really sucks. They chose this person. And it's like, well, let's think back. How much have you taught them about identifying red flags in people? Right. If you've put them in environments where there are red flags everywhere and you've allowed them to stay in that environment, like a public school environment, for instance, you have normalized them to those red flags. You have taught them that those red flags are acceptable and there's nothing to be alarmed about, right? So no wonder they get to high school. And so I think Stefan Molyneux uses this example all the time. Like if you raise your kid in China, they're going to learn Chinese. And if you raise them in America, they're going to learn English. And that's kind of going to be their normal. And they're going to have a little bit of a struggle when they go to another culture, and there's going to be a lot of time involved in learning and so on and so forth and getting comfortable there. That's kind of how you want them to be in the red flag situations. You want them to grow up in an environment of green flags so that when they get into a red flag environment, they are extremely uncomfortable and like, what is going on here? This is completely unacceptable. I'm getting out of this situation. However, if you program them to be accepting of these red flag environments, well, hey, that's what's normal to them now. So you can't stop it.
Right. Yeah. And I've seen that firsthand with my daughter. Like I said, when she's around public school kids, and they'll even often be coming up to her and saying, hey, you look like you're about my age. Do you want to play or whatever? And very quickly, she's just dismisses them.
Yeah.
They'll talk for a little bit, and then she'll end up again, at the park or at the local pool or whatever. She'll come over to me, come on, Dad, come play with me in the pool. She's not interested in playing with those people. She just doesn't click with them.
Yeah.
And then the ones that she does click with, I always do this where I meet I'll invite the family over and we hang out together, and the children that she does naturally click with, they come from good families where the people are, I'm like, oh, okay, these people are all, there's no red flags here. Just inevitably.
And we should probably explain the psychology behind that a little. We'll probably have to do a whole podcast episode on that, but it can sound to a lot of people like that's kind of snobbery. But it's really, it's the natural order of things, okay? Broken people and healthy people typically don't get along. They don't coexist very well. And this is why you'll see broken people continue to choose broken people to have relationships with. This is why you'll see when somebody chooses a husband or a wife and they have a broken mom who is objecting over and over and over again to this relationship because the mom is desperately afraid that the healthy person their son or daughter just chose is going to point out how nuts the mother is, right? So she is actually she wants the daughter or her son to choose a broken person because that's a safe thing for her. That prevents her from being called out, right? And this plays out over and over and over again in relationships and society in general, that broken people and healthy people just don't jive very well. So that's what's happening with your daughter, right? She has senses that this is kind of a broken person here, and I'm just going to kind of move over here and try to find healthier people to interact with, right? It's a natural thing.
Right. And this isn't something that happens at the conscious level. It's comfort. Like you said, what's normal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Subconscious level, I'm just comfortable around these people. It's not snobbery.
Right.
I mean, just think about yourself. Are you friends with every single person you encounter? Or is there like some people you're comfortable with, you become friends with them? Think about when you were in school. Were you friends with everyone? Or were there some that you had a close group and then there were others that you weren't? Well, the chances are, it had nothing to do with you being a snob.
Right.
I mean, maybe at school's an unnatural, violent environment where there's like that click thing going on.
Yeah, that's real snobbery. Snobbery is like, oh, he's got Jordans. I'm going to be friends with him and nobody else. Like, that's snobbery. That's a conscious decision, right? Yeah, we're talking about subconscious cues based on the normalization of personality.
Right. So, yeah. But this is it. Just think in your life about how you've selected friends and why you go to a party and you don't know anyone. You talk to 10 people and it ends up being one or two of them you end up hanging out with the whole night. Mm-hmm. Were you being a snob to those other people, or was it you were just comfortable with these people?
Right.
So it's just that's all it is. There's a comfort level, and what you want to do is you want to set the comfort level that healthy people is what they're used to. If they're not healthy, that seems very strange, and that's going to set them up for happiness on many levels, be it in their relationships, with their friends, with significant others, be it in jobs. They're going to go into this job and be like, well, this guy's an ass. I'm not going to stay here. If we've got a boss that's, extremely wounded, and it's going to serve them if they start their own business, being able to relate to clients and things of that nature. So you're setting them up for good psychological health, for happiness, and to be successful at whatever it is they want to do. Not necessarily successful in what society says success is, but what they choose to call success, because we're all individuals. And this is actually what we're talking about here is nurturing the individual. And instead of looking at what other people say is successful, I'm going to define it for myself, and then I'm going to reach it, and I'm going to be happy and fulfilled. So this is what this sets up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we can close with this, but if you understand this normalization process, you can't send your kids to public schools, because you don't go to public schools to find healthy people. You can't, because all of society is in public school, and all of society is not healthy. It's a red flag environment. So you send a child to a red flag environment hoping that they come away with a lot of green flags. Like, it's just not going to happen. They give the advice of don't go to bars to pick up women. Like, you're not going to find going to find the prize woman at a bar, right? Now, that's not to say that you can't. Like, you probably can, but if you want the numbers to be on your side, you don't make that decision. Like, it's not a good gamble, right? So it's not a good gamble to send your child to public school either. Like, could something good come out of it? Possibly. Like, it's in the realm of possibility, but it's a red flag environment. There's one green flag and 99 red flags, and you're hoping that they're going to grab that one green flag, and it's probably not going to happen.
Right. Yeah, this is one of those examples where someone says, well, I went to public school and I turned out all right.
Yeah.
And we could do a whole podcast unpacking that one. Or maybe you didn't go to public school, but you're not quite on board with this. And you say, you know what? I had a friend who went to public school and they turned out all right. And it's like, okay, do you understand what a generalization is?
Or the fact that, did you notice everybody's all right? Like, nobody's like, well, yeah, I'm broken. I'm broken as hell. Like, no, everybody you talk to is just fine, right? But if you look at the population globally, it's like, wow, there's a lot of screwed up people. But every individual you talk to, I'm just fine. I'm just fine around here. Everything's good. Everything's kosher. We're good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know that's baloney because, like you said, 70% of people hate their jobs. You're not just fine. If you hate where you're spending the bulk of your waking hours, you're miserable. Sorry.
Well, I have a definition
there.
I have a definition for fine. It's actually an acronym, but I'll share that on a future podcast.
All right.
I think I shared it in the book, actually. Do you remember that part?
I remember it, but I don't remember the acronym.
All right, good. Well, we'll cover that on a different show. So are we done? We're good? We'll wrap this one up?
Let's do it.
All right. So we'll be back, guys. Rebootyourkids.com. And this was the 4th podcast. So you're probably listening to this on iTunes. Definitely, if you got something out of this, share it with somebody. We would love to bring more people into the community. We will be back soon with another episode of the Reboot Your Kids podcast. Have a great week.
Around the world, 'cause I'm the wanderer. Yeah, I'm the wanderer. Roam around and round and round and round. Take it, Mark! Roam from town to town, live life without a care. I'm as happy as a clown, with my 2 fists of iron, but I'm going nowhere. I'm the type of guy who never settles down. The pretty girls are, you know that I'm around. I kiss them and I love them, 'cause to me they're all the same. I hug them and I squeeze them. They don't even know my name. They call me the wanderer. Yeah, I'm the wanderer. I roam around and round and round and round. Yeah, I'm the wanderer. Yeah, I'm the wanderer. I roam around and round and round and round. One more time, 'cause I'm the